Jazeera senior political analyst, Marwan Bashara. Marwan, so just tell me what stood out for you from that press conference before we drill down into some of the detail.
Yeah, I mean, of course, everything been said there, we've been subjected to more than half an hour of propaganda, basically, from two officials. There's no time to answer each and every cliche, soundbite, and tired, lies told about Palestine, about Gaza. But I will distill it into what I now jot down as 4 Ds. That's my takeaway. But before I get that, let me say that there's absolutely nothing new of what we heard today. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Nothing new was said in this press conference. Basically, the Secretary of Defense came, and he's going to leave without letting us, at least, know that he had any influence whatsoever, that he used any leverage whatsoever with the Israelis. So, in as far as we are concerned, there is nothing new. Now, in the overall, I could just summarize as following. There is a continuous demonization of Hamas, right? I mean, they don't even stop and think about why Hamas was able to withstand the incredible bombing. How could they able to resist the Israeli troops? Why were they able to be so steadfast for so long? Nothing about that. Only that Hamas is there to kill Jews and destroy the Jewish state. We all know that Hamas was created under the occupation, as a product of the occupation, that is meant to resist the occupation. And Hamas, just until a couple of days ago, was saying that they are looking forward for a state on the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. Just until 2 days ago, one of their leaders was talking about that. But none of that is mentioned. It's only about demonizing them as an enemy that has to be decimated. The second thing, which is even more disturbing, is the dehumanization of the Palestinians. I mean, look at them. They don't stop talking about what happened October 7 and nothing about what happened since October 7. So even if you would want to understand why the Israeli defense minister might do that, why is the Secretary of Defense of the United States incapable of expressing anything about what happened to the Palestinians? He could just address the fact that 7,000 children died, that 20,000 people have died, that there are tens of thousands of casualties, that the Israelis have destroyed the entire infrastructure of Gaza. Nothing. Total and utter dehumanization of the Palestinian people. 3, the double standard. The dehumanization takes us to double standard. When Secretary Austin talks about Ukraine, he talks nonstop about why collective punishment is a war crime. Why is the bombardment of residential buildings in Kharkiv is a war crime. But the destruction of residential buildings in Gaza, nothing. The collective punishments of Gaza is nothing. He talks about human shield. Really? Are we still talking about human shield 70 days later, when we know that the man standing next to him, Mr. Gallant, was clear from the very beginning that there will be collective punishment, that the Palestinians will be denied food, fuel, electricity, etc.,
right,
because they are human animals. And last but not least is the issue of the debacle. There is no recognition that Israel could not achieve its objective despite the incredible suffering, that it still has months to go, which will be completely unacceptable to the international community, and that the United States and Israel are isolated. They are stand alone today. It's not that Hamas versus the world today. It's Israel and the United States.
But let me ask you this then. How does this fit into what we also heard from the Defense Secretary announcing that he's planning on building a coalition to address the threat that's coming from, according to him, from the Houthis in the Red Sea?
Okay, so now let's move to the wider region.
Right.
You read in the American press, right, today, that the United States is having an uphill battle, an incredible challenge to get the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Egyptians on board. They're actually incapable today, unable anyway, thus far, to mount any regional coalition, because no one wants to step in after the war in Yemen, right? And in light of the genocide in Gaza, to join hands with the United States, let alone Israel, in order to take on anyone in the region. That's one. Two, he failed to answer the question, why isn't he responding in Yemen? He failed. I mean, there are actually ballistic missiles and drones and whatever being shot in various directions out of Yemen. America is not responding. America is also not doing something very important. We haven't paid attention to it yet. You know, America lifted or put out, I mean, what's the word? Lifted the Houthis from the U.S. list of terrorism. Mm-hmm. It's no longer considered a terrorist organization. But days into these operations, and the United States is yet to put the Houthis back on the terrorist list. Why? Right? There's a major challenge going on. And I think the Houthis basically, you know, I mean, think what we may about their role in Yemen and why they shouldn't be ruling in Yemen and so on and so forth. But they really pulled the carpet from under the United States and Israel in their continuous persistent attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, basically becoming a real actor in this issue and forcing the United States to deal with them, plead with them to stop what they're doing. But they are not an irrational actor at this point in time. What the Houthis are saying is, open the humanitarian aid to Gaza, stop the war in Gaza, and we will stop what we're doing. So they're not just going on some kind of a, you know, ballistic spree in the Red Sea.
Right.
They're actually very targeted for a very particular objective.
What about the what seemed to be threats to Lebanon? Again, not new. We've heard this from Israeli officials before. Yoav Gallant saying that they'd like a political solution when it comes to Hezbollah. Now, we know what that political solution is, according to the Israelis. They want the Hezbollah to go north of the Litani River, which Hezbollah says that's not going to happen. So how do you see that developing?
Well, as you said at the beginning of your question, there is nothing new, right? We've heard these lines before. I think they are stuck. So, as you said also in your question, that Hezbollah says, well, this is a whole new reality now, right? And what Israel is doing and what Israel has been doing is not acceptable to us Lebanese. And we will not be taking threats. And we will not accept that Israel says, basically in so many words, Gaza today, Beirut tomorrow, right? An ultimatum of such are not acceptable to Hezbollah or to Lebanon. Why should Lebanon be at the mercy of Israel and what it wants to plan next? So Hezbollah also has a responsibility towards its own allies, towards its own citizens, towards its own country. Right. So I think they're also stuck there. And when Secretary Lloyd was asked, would you join in, will you not join in? Why the hell did you send these aircraft carriers in the first place? There are no answers. They don't have answers today to the challenges that they've created themselves. And just a quick one as to this entire thing, right? This whole thing started with occupation of Lebanon after '82. And that's when Hezbollah was created. Occupation of Palestine. Occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. That's when Hamas is created. We are not talking about why these are resistance movements. They're still talking about them as terrorist movements. You know, I myself will not justify any act of terrorism. Analytically speaking, I would say Hamas and Hezbollah carry terrorist attacks. Like Israel is a state-sponsored terrorism. It actually does everything that is terroristic in Gaza. But Israel is a state. And these are resistance movements. That's what they are. They were created under occupation. They are resisting occupation. And their end game is the end of an occupation. And if they have solidarity amongst themselves in the region, that's their right. That's their duty and responsibility. But the Secretary of Defense of the United States, like the Minister of Defense in Israel, refused to recognize the simple fact. They are comparing now their notes about how to deal with Gaza with Hamas and Hezbollah, but really discounting the fact that we all know around the world, that Secretary Austin's experience, long experience, is in Iraq. That was an occupied country by the United States under false pretext. That was an illegal war, a war of choice against Iraq. So let's not all forget that. This is not just some kind of an academic exercise. Lloyd Austin built his expertise against what he calls terrorism after occupying a country, and then there was a resistance against American occupation of Iraq. We have the same situation in Gaza. It's an occupied territory, and the resistance groups are once again called terrorists for resisting their occupiers.
Right.
No, Hamas's end game is not killing Jews. No. Hamas's end game is liberating Palestine, liberating their land to have a state, according to them, next to Israel. That should be considered a legitimate right of defense. Israel, on the other hand, like the United States, we're involved in wars that are illegal wars. And what we have in Gaza is an illegal occupation, an illegal siege. That should end, not the resistance groups' duty to their citizens to resist their occupiers.
All right. Thank you so much. Marwan Bishara.